Hello, good morning everyone, or whatever time you're watching this. I hope you're well. I hope your day has been or is going to be fantastic. So today we are going to talk through the symptoms of endometriosis. We're going to look at the common symptoms, the ones that are kind of accepted in Western medicine, the ones that sort of trigger the fact that something's wrong, and then we're going to look at the least common, that's not probably the right word, but the least known symptoms of endometriosis as well. So we're going to look at all things physical, emotional and spiritual as well, because as those of you who work with me know, that body, mind and soul connection is imperative in everything that I do. So the first thing to say is this will not be a definitive list of the symptoms of endometriosis, and that is really because I don't think such a thing exists. I think this is such a complex condition, and we still don't know, even in Eastern medicine, we still don't know enough about it to categorically say, yes, this symptom is endometriosis or this symptom is not endometriosis. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is basically my experience of what people experience when they have endometriosis. So from my own journey to the journey of my clients, we're going to be looking at some of the things that have cropped up for people along their endometriosis journey. Some of them are the normal stuff, and we'll start with the bog standard textbook symptoms of endometriosis, and then we will look at the more unusual, the ones that you might be a little bit surprised to hear about. So fabulous. So we'll delve straight in. Hi, thank you for joining me. I can see that there's somebody there, so hi, good morning. If you have any comments when you're going along, just pop them. I've set it up now so you can see, so I can see the comments that are coming through. So if you do have any questions as we're going along, feel free to pop them in. If you're watching on replay, give me a hashtag replay so that I know that you're watching on replay, and that will just prompt me to come back into the thread to answer any questions or comments that pop up. So yeah, we'll delve straight in. We'll look at the most common or the most recognised symptoms of endometriosis first. So when you hear people talk about endometriosis and that myth that we busted the other day in terms of it's just a bad period, the thing that stems from is the fact that the initial symptoms that people tend to recognise, that they tend to seek help with, are the, hi Stacey, oh I'm glad you could catch me, I hope you're well. Or the symptoms of the menstrual cycle that are exaggerated, that are going wrong, for want of a better phrase. And I don't like to say words like wrong and bad and put that stigma on it, but it's that kind of thing that people seek help for in the first instance. So things like really heavy periods when they're bleeding, it's really heavy, irregular periods, painful periods, because, and we'll talk about a healthy menstrual cycle later in the week, but none of this should be happening. Your menstrual cycle should, in an ideal world, pass pretty much without any issues. It should be a beautiful thing. It should be celebrated. It's what makes us women fabulous, and trans men as well, makes us fabulous beings. It is part of us, and it shouldn't cause us issues. At the absolute most, you should maybe experience a little bit of cramping maybe the day before, but we're not talking kind of severe cramping. It may be just a couple of twinges the day before, and that should be the only pain that we feel in an ideal period. Same with bleeding. It shouldn't be heavy. You should be bleeding. And again, we'll go into this later in the month. So in terms of endometriosis, the symptoms that most people seek help for are the ones that show up in the menstrual cycle. So we're talking intense pain, and that can be around menstruation, but what some people don't realise as well is that it can be any time of the cycle. So ovulation is a really common time for people to feel that pain, and any time in between as well. There's no hard and fast rule to that pain. It depends on the stage of endo, on the sighting of the endo that you have, and also what's going on as well, because we know, and again I'll look at this further in the month, but we know that stress is a massive trigger for endometriosis. So if you're stressed, if you're experiencing more of your triggers than normal, then that's going to bring that on. So there's no hard and fast rule in terms of day 14, ovulation, that's when my pain starts. It's not that black and white, it's not that cut and dry. So clotting, so heavy periods, so the menstruation can be irregular. It doesn't have to be, but it can be irregular, so it can be very common. There's a lot of people that I'm seeing at the moment who are having very short cycles, at the minute. I don't know what that's about, but the cycle can be really short or the cycle can be really long. Basically, I would say anything for an adult woman, anything that is longer than 30, 31 days probably is a bit of a flag. If everything else is all right, then there's probably nothing to worry about. But anything shorter than sort of 24 days, anything longer than 30, 31 days, then start to look at other things that are going on as well, just as a bit of a flag, a warning flag. And that's not to say that it's wrong if your cycle is 32, 33 days consistently. It's just that in an ideal world, it should be a bit shorter. So if other things are going on, if you're trying to get pregnant, if you are experiencing any of the symptoms, then that's just a factor to look into. So I'm holding my microphone up here because stupidly I put a necklace on and it keeps banging against the microphone. So that's why I'm kind of hovering this in midair. So yes, clotting. So as well as the heavy bleeding, the presence of clots is very, very common for people with endometriosis. Again, that has all of these things have in common with a lot of other illnesses, sort of those pelvic illnesses that we've already talked about. These are not necessarily specific to endometriosis, but these are the most common first symptoms that people tend to seek advice about. So yeah, really heavy periods, clotting, so the presence of clots in the menstrual blood as well, that really in a healthy period that wouldn't happen. The blood, and again that word should, but the blood in a healthy period is normally sort of a crisp red is my best term for it, and is free of clots. So if you're getting clots, that is very symptomatic of endometriosis or polycystic ovaries or anything of that ilk. And yeah, the irregular bleeding. So if there's something going on with your cycle, it's either too long, too short, you're skipping periods, or you just don't know when it's going to happen. That again is another symptom that something's wrong. So they're the main physical symptoms that people tend to seek help with endometriosis, and they're the symptoms that and pain. I don't think I mentioned pain. That's top of my list. I've written them all down because I always forget stuff when I'm live, but pain is obviously top of the list. So yeah, the pain at any time of the cycle in the lower abdomen normally, so around where the ovaries, where the uterus is, that's where the bulk of the pain in the initial symptoms that people report tend to happen. So that pain is very localized and very intense. Okay, so they're the ones that people tend to go to the doctors with. They're the ones that when you read a leaflet or Google endometriosis, they're the ones that always come up. They're the ones that kind of say, these are the symptoms, these are the physical symptoms of endometriosis. However, there are some symptoms as well that are very common, but are less recognised. And a lot of people, when they realise that it is part of their endometriosis, it's like a light bulb moment, and it's like, oh, I'd never even thought of that, but now we've mentioned it, now we've highlighted that yeah, it's so true. So things like, so carrying on with the pain theme. So obviously pain during sex, pain if you wear a tampon, that's quite a common one. That's actually listed in the list of common symptoms. But also we can have pain in the hip, pain going down the leg. So again, it depends where your endo is and what it looks like, but very, very common to have what I term a dragging pain, and I get this myself, but like a dragging pain down the leg. Mine's everything, all my symptoms to do with my endometriosis are on my right side, so that's also worth looking at, because if something's always happening on one side of the body, then that's another flag that it could be related to your endometriosis. So yeah, a dragging pain down the leg, heavy legs, that kind of feeling as if you've just run a marathon. Well, I've never run a marathon, but that feeling as if your legs are just so tired, they're really heavy, they're really achy, and like a dragging sensation as well. Now, I always describe this, sorry if you're eating breakfast, but I always describe my pain, because I've never found a better way of describing it, as if somebody has a coat hanger and is sort of turning the coat hanger into my uterus and just pulling everything down, and it's sort of dragging everything from the legs, sort of dragging it. Does that make sense? So the pain isn't necessarily a piercing pain, it can be a nagging pain, it can be a dragging pain. Whatever pain you feel, just recognize that as well, because no pain is better or worse than the other pain. So it doesn't have to be a stabbing pain, it doesn't have to be a pain as in you've been hit. It can be like a really numbing pain as well. So many different, the word for pain in Britain should be like the Eskimo word for or the Inuit word for snow, because there's so many different types of pain. It doesn't really do it justice to say just it's painful. So yes, pain down the leg, pain into the hip, that is quite a common one, especially as I was talking yesterday in terms of the psoas muscle and the other big muscles tensing up and pulling sort of joints and things. That sounds way more dramatic than it actually is, but that can lead to aches in joints. So specifically hip pain, knee pain. As I said yesterday, my knee pain was so bad. I almost had a keyhole operation in my knee many years ago. Because they thought it was cartilage, but when they did the MRI scan, there was no cartilage issues present, so it kind of stumped them. And it wasn't until I started looking at endometriosis in more detail, about 10 years after that, that I realised that actually this pain was all related to the endometriosis, and it's cause and effect. For some people, the pain might be related to what's causing their endometriosis, and for some people, the pain might be an impact of their endometriosis. And again, it doesn't matter in my world. It doesn't matter whether what you're experiencing is cause or pain, because we address everything. Cause or effect, because we address everything. But yes, for some people, like in terms of the tense pelvis, pulling the pelvis round, then the hip pain, the misfiring of glutes, so almost like a sciatica pain as well, that can be part and parcel of the cause. So as we're addressing the cause, we would look to relax off all those pelvic muscles. We would look to engage the glutes properly, and you'll find that hip pain will disappear, because you're getting down to the cause of it. It could be that you have endometrial tissue or endometrial type tissue in your hip as part of your endometriosis as well, or instead. So that could be part of the effect of your endometriosis. But as we look to try and clear that endometriosis as best we can, and to relax all the muscles to clear the blockages that we spoke about yesterday, then that would also clear up your hip pain as well. So again, it doesn't matter if it's cause or effect. So yeah, down the leg, hip. I've had somebody think that their endometriosis is linked to their ankle as well, which is perfectly believable, perfectly plausible. It could well be. We know, the one thing we know about endometriosis is that we don't know everything about endometriosis. I'm going to share something with you that I wasn't actually going to share, but yeah, I feel safe in this group. For years I've had, again, I'm sorry if you're eating, but for years I've had a couple of nasty toenails, again on my right foot. And I've been to the doctor so many times. I tried the home remedies. I tried hitting it with raw tea tree. I've tried all sorts. I've tried everything, and it's never cleared up. Didn't have any other symptoms, just the big toenail and the toenail to the side. And this has been going on for, I think it must be about 15 years ago that I first noticed it. And sort of in terms of fungal nail infection, then if it was a fungal nail infection, that should have, by rights, it should have spread, and it should have gone onto my other foot. And the doctors could never figure out why this hadn't spread. Anyway, I recently went to the doctors. I'd never really sought doctor's help because I thought I could heal it myself. And I went to the doctors recently because it had got a little bit worse. To the point where I was embarrassed wearing sandals. So I went to the doctors and they did the fungal test. So they sent my toenail clippings away for tests. Anyway, it came back. There was absolutely no fungal tissue there. The levels were normal. There was nothing there. So the doctor was really, really confused. Anyway, this is about 2 years ago. And at that time, again, I'm going to overshare, but at that time, we just started IVF for the first round. And so my hormones, my endometriosis was flared. My hormones were all over the place, and I suddenly realised that my hip pain was back, my knee pain was back, and my toenails were flaring up as well. So I've suddenly realised that I do believe, and obviously I can't prove it, I probably could, but don't know how, that the tissue that's underneath my toenails, because my toenails aren't dead, they're perfectly healthy in terms of the bed of the toenails, it's just right at the end of the toenails, is endometrial tissue or endometrial type tissue. So I do firmly believe that that's linked to my endometriosis as well. So don't ever rule anything out, because for me that link between the flare-up and the flare-up on my toenails is too much. I was thinking about sharing this video on my page afterwards, but I don't think I will. I think I might keep it to this group. do another one for my page. Yeah, sorry if that was oversharing, but you can just see how these symptoms that sometimes, I mean, like I say, I've had that for 15 years. Doctors have, there was no reason. When I did go to the nurse before they took I went to the nurse originally before they took the samples, and she kind of said, well, it's not spreading, so don't worry about it. So they couldn't understand why it wasn't spreading from toenails to toenail, but I do believe that's why. Anyway, so endometriosis can also go up in your body. So there is a diaphragmatic endometriosis diagnosis, and that's where the endometrial tissue, the endometrial-like tissue, goes upwards in your body into your diaphragm. So that's when you can find that you're getting the most severe symptoms of this is when you get pain normally on the in-breath, but it can be on exhale as well. But you get that pain in your lung region when you're breathing. You can also get a cough that's in extreme circumstances, that every now and again you'll cough up a little bit of blood because it is the endometrial type tissue that's in there. So that's a thing as well. And that can also be seen in the shoulder. So you can start to get shoulder pain, neck pain, headaches. Headaches is a symptom, migraines is a symptom of endometriosis anyway. And this is not to worry you. Diaphragmatic endometriosis is very rare. And however you experience your endometriosis, that will be mirrored in the diaphragmatic endometriosis. It's not a scary thing. It's not. I saw a post yesterday. In fact, somebody tagged me in it, and I untagged myself because I saw a post yesterday that related endometriosis to cancer. Which, if you've seen my post from a few days ago in terms of mindset and endometriosis and how we're told that nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to cure us, and we're stuck with this illness, and that impacts our ability or our not our desire to heal, but that just makes us start from a place of fear. That starts us from the mindset that this is never going to get better. And if we start linking endometriosis to cancer, then again we're kind of, that fear is grown and grown. So it is nothing like cancer. Endometriosis in the diaphragm is not like cancer. It can be uncomfortable, it can be painful, it can be debilitating, but it isn't as scary as cancer. So if you do have any of those symptoms, don't dismiss it as a panic attack or as anything else. It could be, but take that to your specialist, take that to your GP, and just say, look, I'm also getting these symptoms. Is this part of my endometriosis? Just to make sure. So we can also get pain when we're moving as well. So again, if the endometriosis has attached itself to any of the muscles in our abdomen, then basically what we're doing, it's almost like a scar tissue in itself, but if it's attached itself to the muscles, if you think about how the muscles work, they're constantly expanding and contracting as we move. So if we have some of the endometriosis on a bit of our muscle and we suddenly twist one way, then we're going to be splitting, almost like a scab on the finger. We're going to be splitting that endometriosis open when we're moving. So that's why we sometimes get that searing pain as well when we're moving, or if we're bending or lifting. It just depends where your endometriosis is. But if you've got endometriosis on any of those muscles, then whenever you flex or contract those muscles, that's going to hurt. So again, that relates back to your cycle. Because at some parts of your cycle, the endometriosis will be more active, if that's the right word, than at other times of your cycle. Because at the end of the day, it is acting like the tissue in your uterus. So it is feeding off your hormones, and it is going to be more active. It's going to be more triggered at certain times. And I'm going to talk about journaling and keeping a diary tomorrow. But this is why I find it so valuable for my clients to keep a diary of what's going on in their cycle and what they're experiencing, so they can really understand their endometriosis and their body and really come to terms with exactly what's going on and what that endometriosis is showing up as. So yes, at certain points of your cycle, or it could happen all the time, if you've got that endometriosis on a muscle, and if you twist or turn your muscles, then that can cause that searing pain, and that's why it's almost like opening up a scab every time you move, which is lovely, isn't it? We're so blessed with this condition. So bloating, again, this is a really common thing. And again, so sort of bloating of the tummy, of the abdomen. Again, a lot of people see that around a couple of days before menstruation, but again, that can happen at any time in your cycle. Endotummy is a real thing. I know people who've gone up a good couple of dress sizes at various points of their cycle just due to the endotummy. And throughout this month, and again, what I work with my clients, we can look at things like diet, stress levels, water intake, water retention, toxins in the system, gut health, and all of this can help relax and reduce that bloating sensation. So I talked yesterday, and again we'll talk more about it, but in terms of the IBS type symptoms that endo can bring on, this is one of them. So it can be, as I talked about yesterday, it can be a symptom or it can be part of the cause. So it can be because you've got the tilted pelvis, as the example I gave yesterday. So if you've got a tilted pelvis, then this is going to lead to issues with the gut, it's going to lead to issues with the bowel, which can cause the bloating. Or the bloating could just be because we're not moving as much, because our diets are a bit off, because we're feeling bad, because we're having a flare-up. So it can be cause, it can be effect, but it's really, really common, this bloating thing. And I'm going to talk you through later in the month. I'm going to be doing loads of things. I'll show you a really, really, really nice abdominal massage technique. I'll show you how to do a castor oil pack. What else I'm going to do that can help with bloating? Actually, the steam might help with bloating as well. I'll show you how to do a steam, and just like a herbal and essential oil wrap as well. We can show you how to do that. So there's lots of things that we can do to help. But again, that's just addressing the symptom. It's not actually the root cause. So water retention I've sort of touched on. So yes, again, at various times of your cycle, you might notice that you're retaining water a bit more than normal. When that's the case, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but just up your water intake. And again, I'm talking about water, not tea, not coffee, not juice. They're all fine. They're still liquids. Wine, they're still liquids. But I'm talking, when I talk about water intake, I mean water. And filtered water preferably. So if you can get a filter, and again we'll talk about toxins, but if you can get a filter, then filtered water is the ideal. And if you notice that bloating, if you notice that water retention that's kicking in, just up your water intake for that period of your cycle, because part of dehydration is water retention. So it sounds counterintuitive, but just try and flush it out with a little bit more water. And I've written something here that I can't actually understand my own writing, which is brilliant. So we shall move on to the bleeding. So we've already talked about a heavy menstrual bleed being a typical symptom of endometriosis. What you can also find is that you bleed at different times as well. So again, it just depends on your endometriosis. It depends on your cycle and how you're impacted. But the bleeding that you can also experience, you can experience bleeding during or after sex. You can experience bleeding when you go to the toilet, so either with urine or with feces. When you're just normally going to the toilet, there might be spotting or clotting or bleeding. When you do any of those things, they're really, really common symptoms of endometriosis. And again, it's fascinating. I think if you're working with me on a one-to-one basis, it is important for us to understand when that's happening. So again, it comes back to what we're going to talk about tomorrow in terms of journaling and reflecting and understanding your endometriosis. But that could happen at any point in the cycle. It could happen all the time. It could happen just around ovulation, could happen just around menstruation. Entirely sort of dependent on your individual circumstances. But again, that's perfectly acceptable as an endometriosis symptom. Also nosebleeds as well. So if you're getting the diaphragmatic endometriosis, you might find, again, when I mentioned the coughs, you might find that you get a little bit of blood in a cough or even in a nosebleed as well. So again, it's just really understanding your body, knowing your body, and noticing when these things are happening. So another physical symptom is sickness. So again, at any time in your cycle, I think Emily, who commented in the post this morning, was saying that she feels incredibly nauseous and is sick at day one of her cycle. That's not uncommon. Also sort of around ovulation, whenever ovulation happens for you, that can happen. And again, any time of the cycle really. So this is when it comes back to tracking everything. But feeling sick, feeling nauseous, almost feeling a little bit dizzy and lightheaded with that nausea, that's a common endometriosis symptom. And then actually throwing up as well, that can happen as well. Now that can happen just as a result of just as a result of living with this chronic pain, because pain is pain does a lot of things to us that we wouldn't necessarily recommend, so it can be a side effect of living with the pain. So bowels, we've talked a little bit around this already, but yes, endometriosis. One of the most common misdiagnoses I see, and I think Stacey mentioned this yesterday, is that a lot of people are diagnosed with IBS when actually they have endometriosis. One of the main reasons for this is because of the symptoms that, and again it comes to cause or effect, but the symptoms of IBS are incredibly parallel to some of the symptoms that some people get with endometriosis. So especially if you've got endometriosis on your bowel, if that was a thing that they found during the laparoscopy, or even if it isn't, what can happen? Do you remember yesterday when I was talking about that blockage scenario? So what can happen in terms of, again, taking the tilted pelvis? If you have the tilted pelvis, then your bowels are going to be impacted because they're not going to be free-flowing. Similarly, if you have your endometrial tissue on your bowel, that's going to sort of be causing a bit of an obstruction. And when we go through the abdominal massage, I'll talk a little bit more about this, because we also have two valves in our gut, which I never knew about and wasn't told about this in GCSE biology, but we have two valves in our gut, one at each side. And what they do is control what goes through into the next stage of the gut. So they're constantly opening and shutting, but they only open and shut once the food is ready to pass through to the next stage of the gut. So if you want to Google it, I think it's the Houston valve and the IC valve, the ileocecal valve. Ileocecal, anyway, the IC valve. And that's constantly opening and shutting, and that's what lets the food through. Now, what can happen is, as well as kind of all the other stuff we've got in terms of the tilted pelvis and everything, but what can happen is those valves get stuck, and they can get stuck open, which causes diarrhea because the food is passing through before it's ready to, before it should naturally be passing through. The valve can get stuck closed, which causes constipation because obviously nothing is getting past, so you're getting all the blockage behind it. And it can get shut halfway, which is when some food gets stuck and some food passes through. So if you have a mixture of diarrhea and constipation, it can often be that one of the valves is stuck halfway. And when we get to the abdominal massage, I'll show you how to combat this. Basically, just pop a finger in your abdomen where the valve is and wiggle it around is the basic technique. But just have a feel, if you do struggle with that symptom, just have a feel around. If you draw a line between your belly button and the top of your hip, the valves are around halfway on each side, and just have a feel, and you'll feel a little bit of tenderness where the valve is. Once you've done it a few times, you can actually feel the valve, but it starts off you'll just notice a little bit of tenderness. It almost feels a little bit bruised as you push it in. That's where your valves are. So quite often just massaging those can help with those symptoms. So I've given away. I'm still going to repeat it in a day just in case nobody watches this. But yeah, so you've got sort of your IBS symptoms as well. Now, what can happen, again, just to go back to the valves, what can actually happen if you've got endometrial tissue on that valve, then that is going to stick that valve open a little bit. So that valve can be stuck because of the tilted pelvis. It also responds, and again, we'll go into this later in the month, but it also responds to your emotions as well. The Chinese especially put a lot of faith in the gut in terms of emotional stuff. So if you're feeling tense, if you're feeling stressed, then those the bowel can contract, and those valves can get stuck as well. So there's so many factors which we'll delve into, but IBS type symptoms are so common with endometriosis, and like I say, it's one of the most common misdiagnoses I see. And to be honest, is it a misdiagnosis? Because if you're having the IBS type symptoms, if you're being triggered by food, if you're being triggered by stress, then it kind of is IBS. But the danger is that the clinician will just say it's IBS and they won't delve any deeper when actually it's endometriosis. So when I say misdiagnosis, it's probably not as bad as it sounds, but it just sometimes just stops that further investigation, because that can be the first sign as well that people don't realise is endometriosis. They always sort of say the pain in the abdomen and the clotting with the period, irregular periods, but actually a lot of people report having IBS symptoms before they've had the bleeding issues, or they've gone to their GPs with the IBS type symptoms before they report the menstrual cycle issues. Okay, so sensitivity to touch. This is another one that's quite common, but people don't really realise it's endometriosis related. Again, it could be a symptom just of living with the chronic pain. It could be a reaction to the body. One of the things about endometriosis is that it's an inflammatory disease. It could be an autoimmune response as well. In some people, again, I don't think it's probably everyone, but it can be an autoimmune disease as well. So one of the things that I do see with some of my clients, not by any stretch all of my clients, but some of them, when they're having a flare-up or at any time of the cycle, again, journal, they feel very sensitive to the touch. So if somebody touches them, it can feel, again, that bruised feeling of the skin. If you bang into something, then it feels a lot more painful at certain times of the month than at other times. So that sensitivity is actually quite a common thing, but you never see that documented anywhere. So again, that could be another symptom of your endometriosis. So again, just take notice of how your body's responding. Headaches and migraines are really, really common. And again, this could be the stress that comes with endometriosis. It could be linked to dehydration, but headaches and migraines are really, really common. Next week, my colleague Jane is coming in. I think it's the 10th. She's coming in, and I'll publicise what's happening next week tomorrow. But she's coming in to talk about migraines. She's a migraine specialist, so she's going to be linking migraines and endometriosis and telling you fantastic ways of overcoming migraines and headaches. They can be hormonal as well. So she's going to make that link and sort of talk you through how to address those. So yeah, there's numerous reasons behind those migraines. So you could be looking at stress related, you could be looking at water intake, you could be looking at the hormonal imbalances. So all of those, but again, another symptom of endometriosis. And fatigue. It's really good. I've been listening to a few podcasts and broadcasts, and I'm actually going to see if I can get one of the practitioners to come and talk towards the end of this month. But I know Sally does it actually. I might ask Sally, who's going to come and talk about acupuncture. I might see if Sally can do a talk as well on productivity cycles during our menstrual cycle and how our energy levels correspond to what part of the cycle we're on. And now, obviously, with endometriosis, if an irregular cycle is one of your symptoms, then your productivity level just at a basic thing is going to be impacted. So in Chinese medicine, our body goes through cycles. So we sort of say winter, autumn, spring, and summer as part of our menstrual cycle. And winter, as the example, is the winter time of our cycle is when we withdraw. It's when we nurture, it's when we get a little bit more tired. It's that time of the month where we prefer woolly socks over stilettos. It's very stereotypical, but we prefer woolly jumpers over spangly vest tops. You know, it's that time of the cycle where we just want to relax and nurture ourselves. With endometriosis, if the cycle is heavy, if the cycle is stagnant, then we will get more of those kind of feelings and they will be more intense. And then we also get the effect of living with the pain. We also get the effect of the stress. So that can lead to an immense fatigue at any time of the cycle, all of the cycle. If you're having a bad flare-up, if you're having a bad month, that incredible fatigue where your legs just feel so tired, you haven't even got the energy to raise your hands sometimes. That, again, is a very common symptom of endometriosis. And right the way through to just having a really tired day where all you want to do is crawl back into bed and shut the world out. So they're really, really common symptoms of endometriosis as well. So they're the physical symptoms. When we start to look at, sorry, I've gone on way longer than I said I was going to go on again. So emotional symptoms, when we start looking at the emotional and the spiritual symptoms of endometriosis, again, that fatigue plays because that can cause sort of depression almost, or depressive tendencies, I'd say, rather than depression. So depressive tendencies and anxious feelings of anxiety, that's really, really common with people with endometriosis. So much so that I actually run anxiety courses now as well, because a lot of the time, almost like being an endometriosis specialist makes you a specialist in anxiety. I was diagnosed with anxiety in my teens, about 15, I think. So it really isn't uncommon for people with endometriosis to have a diagnosis of anxiety. And when I was talking yesterday about cause and effect, sometimes it can be unclear whether that anxiety is part of the cause as well. So if the same thing that's causing you to be anxious is actually one of your triggers for your endometriosis, or chicken and egg, whether it's the endometriosis that's making you anxious. Again, in my world, it doesn't matter because we address everything anyway. Low moods. So again, this kind of goes back to the myth that it's just a bad period. PMT style low moods. So things like if you find yourself being short-tempered, getting angry, just things that are generally out of character for you. Again, that's a really, really common symptom of endometriosis. Irritability, brain fog as well. So if you, again, at any point of your cycle, again, this is why journaling is so important, but that brain fog is really common as well. So if you're struggling to make decisions, if there's sometimes, I mean, naturally, again, with the seasonal cycle of our bodies, it does become, there's some cycles like spring and summer, you're kind of more creative, you're kind of more on it. Excuse me. Excuse me. And so you might not feel it as much there as you do in the autumn and winter months. But with endometriosis, that brain fog can just be exacerbated. So if you really struggle some days or some weeks to make decisions, if you just struggle to grasp things, if you really just, your brain doesn't feel connected to the world, then again, that is a symptom that we've seen with a lot of people with endometriosis. And again, whether that's linked to the stress of having the condition or whether it's linked to the cause of your condition, again, it doesn't matter. In a way, it's immaterial in terms of how we address it, but it just does show that there's kind of different things going on that we don't necessarily know about. And anxiety. So like I say, we've covered anxiety, but that is a really, really common aspect. And again, it doesn't need to be there all the time. So again, I'm kind of spoiling tomorrow's life, but again, journaling can really help you see if there's any correlation between the times of the month, the times of your cycle where you are feeling more anxious, and that can correlate to your endometriosis symptoms as well. And then when I talk about the spiritual, so again, the soul, again, that just comes back to that lethargy. When your soul is healthy and balanced, then you're interested in the world. Your soul is nurtured if you're listening to music, if you're reading books. So if you kind of don't have that interest, and you are having those depressive tendencies and moods of anxiety and things like that, then that does impact on your soul because your soul isn't being nourished. If you think about your soul as your aura as well, so if you're just feeling a bit and everything's closed in, as opposed to summer where you're all bright and everything's flowing well and you're feeling fabulous and you're glowing, so that's the impact that it can have. That's a symptom that endometriosis and any chronic, this bit is not specifically about endometriosis at all, but living with any chronic condition can impact a little bit spiritually as well, because that's when you just feel very, very low, very, very lethargic and disinterested in the world. Okay, so I hope that's helped. I hope that you've learnt something interesting that you didn't necessarily know before, and I hope it's given some reassurance as well, because a lot of time people come to me and say, oh, I thought my body was just falling apart, I've had this for years, I didn't realise that actually this was part of my endometriosis. Do not ever rule anything out. This is by no stretch, this is kind of the most common unusual symptoms that I've experienced. If you have another uncommon symptom and that I haven't mentioned, that you're worrying or wondering if it is linked to your endometriosis, then great, thanks Stacey, then don't rule it out. The chances are that if it's happened over a prolonged period of time, it might well be linked to your endometriosis. Cause or effect, we can get to the bottom of that, but yeah, just stay curious and keep that connection with your body and understanding your body and your endometriosis. Okay, I'll let you go. Stacey, thank you so much for sticking with me for the full 40 minutes or however long it's been. Have a great weekend, guys. I shall pop on tomorrow. I'm not certain what time. It's just going to be an ad hoc one just to talk about reflecting from this week and the importance of reflection in managing your endometriosis. It'll probably be a similar time, 9 o'clock-ish tomorrow morning. But yeah, have fantastic weekends, everyone, and I shall see you briefly tomorrow. Take care.